Before the break, I talked about the impacts of climate change, and you came away without an answer to the question, so what? The question is climate change a big problem or a small problem? Is it good for you or is it bad for you? Depends on what you do, who you are, when you live, what sort of species you are, and so on and so forth. Right? There's no unambiguous answer. So what we need to do is somehow aggregate all this information. As soon as you start aggregating information, you lose information. Aggregate all this information to a super indicator. And on this picture, on the left, you're looking at scenarios of climate change, and on the right, you're looking at four alternative super indicators of reasons for concern. Is climate change a good thing or a bad thing? Should we worry a little or a lot? That aggregate all the impacts. Now, the reason that we put up four of these is because this really depends on who you are and your attitude towards these things. If you're the sort of person who worries about small islands and who worries about butterflies, then climate is a big concern. Be then on the leftmost of the bars. Why do I say that? Well, actually, past climate change in recent time has been shown to lead to local extinctions of butterflies already. You may wonder how can that be, right? Obviously, plants, butterflies spend a good bit of their lives as caterpillars, and that means that they are strongly dependent on vegetation. If that vegetation disappears because of climate change, then they're in trouble. But you could also sort of like counter, yes, but butterflies can fly, right? Why don't they just fly a little bit further north or south or west or wherever and find whatever they need to survive? The reason for that is that butterflies, yes, can fly, but they are not very good at crossing open spaces. If you're a tiny butterfly, then a rose is a very big open space. So in a fragmented ecosystem, butterflies actually cannot travel that far. And then because of climate change, vegetation within their confined area changes, then they will be in trouble. And actually, they have been documented to go locally extinct because of climate change. So if that is the sort of concern that drives you, that's what motivates you in life. And climate change is an enormous problem. And you should place yourself on the left in this graph. If on the other hand you think that all is fine, as long as the ocean currents don't change too much, as long as Greenland doesn't melt, as long as West Antarctica doesn't slide into the sea, climate change is not less of a concern. These things won't happen during this century. They may happen towards the end of the millennium, but that's about it. So that would imply that we have time to figure out what to do about our greenhouse gas. And the question whether you should care about butterflies or about West Antarctica is a question you should answer yourself. Right? There's no objective guidance to that, whether one is more important than the other. Same is true for the reasons in between, and those are the ones that I will be talking about most. I'll first talk about what are the implications of climate change for the well-being of the average person on the planet, and then I'm going to talk about what are the implications for the distribution of that well-being across people. Now, if we're going to do that, then we somehow need to aggregate all these impacts into their welfare. One way of doing that is to use money. Money actually was invented a long, long time ago to simplify exchange. If you have a monetized economy with two goods, you have two prices. You have one exchange price, so there money actually complicates matters. But if you have an economy with three goods, then you need to trade A for B and B for C. Three prices, you also have three monetary prices. If you go to an economy with four goods, then you actually have more bargaining exchanges than you have monetary prices. And in an economy with many goods. A friend of mine works for Albert Heijn, and they sell 20,000 products. Right? And they don't know the exchange rate between all the 20,000, but they do know the 20,000 prices of all the things that they sell. Right? So money just simplifies things if you want to compare one good to another, or if you want to compare the cost of something to the amount of money, your income that you have to spend. Right? If you express everything in all the impacts of climate change in money, you can also immediately compare it to the costs of greenhouse gas emission reduction. It's also expressed in money. You can compare the impact of climate change to the size of the economy. You can include it in national accounts. You can compare it to other monetized problems. For instance, somewhat inappropriate monetary union in Europe cost the Greeks about 25% of their income over a 5-year period. Is that a bigger or smaller problem than climate change? You want to answer that question, you need to express climate change too in its income equivalent. Right? Or if you're a noble soul and you want to pay those people who suffer most from the consequences of climate change, you want to pay them compensation, and chances are that that compensation will be expressed in monetary terms as well. So if you want to do any of these things, then it actually comes natural to express the impacts of climate change into its dollar or its euro value. Now, for some issues that is simple. So if we're talking about 10% drop in the yield of wheat, then you can just look up what does wheat sell for, and you can figure out maybe you may want to put up the partial equilibrium model, but it sort of comes natural to express that in terms of changes in producer surplus and consumer surplus, or some approximation of that. If you want to raise the dikes, then you cannot just open or look up the price at the internet. You can for wheat or for a whole lot of other commodities, but you can call up some of the companies that build these things and ask them, I have a kilometer of dike, it needs to be raised by 1 meter, how much would it cost? Right? And they would have an answer to that question if you ask it seriously, right? Not the way I did it. So for those things, monetary valuation comes sort of natural, because these things are traded on market. There's also a whole range of impacts of climate change that are not traded on market. Nature, health. And for those things, we have developed, we being the economics profession over the last 60 years or so, have developed a range of methods for doing so. And they have been applied to climate change. I will talk about the results tomorrow, but I'm now going to talk about the methods. The oldest method is the travel pass method. Dates back to the 50s, 1950s. If you go to the cinema, you pay an entrance fee, and presumably, how much do you pay to get into a movie nowadays? 7, 8 euros. Presumably, the worth of the movie or the expected worth of the movie is greater than the 7 euros entrance fee that you pay. Because otherwise, you would be a fool for going there. So the value of that movie, at least an expectation, is at least the entrance fee that you pay. If you travel to the beach, you don't pay an entrance fee, but you travel. The time that you spend on traveling to the beach could have been spent on other things. The money that you spent on your train ticket or on petrol could have been used for other things. So even though nobody is asking you for a ticket when you enter the beach, you actually do pay. So if you go to the beach of Zandvoort, right, you would interview people, ask them, where are you from, where do you live, how much did you spend time and money getting here. What you would get, what you would find is that there's a lot of locals, people who live in the area, who there to walk their dog or whatever. You would find a fair number of people from Amsterdam having traveled there on a nice day. But you wouldn't find any Australians who traveled all the way from Sydney just to go to Zandvoort Beach. Right? If you were to travel to the Great Barrier Reef and ask the same questions chances are you would find somebody from Amsterdam who traveled all the way to Australia to see the Great Barrier Reef. What does that tell you? That the Great Barrier Reef is more spectacular than Sandford Beach. So if you sort of like plot those responses against, say, distance traveled against the number of people, you find lots of locals and fewer people who are. Sandford Beach, you would probably find somebody from Australia who is in the Netherlands for a different reason than Sandford Beach and just had a few hours and decided to go walk on the beach. Right? Now, that curve that you would find, distance, number of people, has the same shape as a demand curve, and it is actually a demand curve. It tells you that the greater effort people need to expend to visit a place like Sandford Beach, the fewer people will do it. The higher the price to get there, the fewer people would buy. So it is a demand curve. And you can imagine that if you have proper data and a good econometrician, you could estimate this demand curve and integrate under it and find the consumer shift. It's as simple as that. There's complications along the way. The Australian that you would find on the beach did find it worthwhile to travel from wherever he's staying, wherever his hotel or her hotel is, to the beach. And perhaps this may have factored in a little bit in the decision to travel here. The person from Amsterdam you found on the Great Barrier Reef will also go see the Sydney Opera House, right? And will also go visit Bondi Beach, right? Which is a lot more exciting than Amsterdam. So as soon as you introduce multi-purpose trips, you need to somehow allocate the main 24-hour flight between Amsterdam and Sydney, the main chunk to the various purposes. Why you're doing this? So there's an allocation problem there. It can be sorted. There's other problems that sort of obscure this, right? If you travel to the beach in an open-top car with 4 good friends, the journey itself is part of the pleasure, right? If you travel on your own in a crowded train on a hot day, that's actually not very pleasant, right? So there's issues there in how you measure this. Conceptually, it's simple. The hedonic pricing method is simple in its concept too. A beautiful house, a house that sits in a beautiful environment fetches a higher price than the exact same house that sits in an ugly environment. And the price difference is people's willingness to pay to live in a nice environment rather than an ugly environment. So you can imagine that if you have a large database with house prices and all the correlates of house prices that people care about, the size of the house, the state of maintenance, the age, the size of the garden, the color of the bathroom, the quality of the schools nearby, crime rates in the local area, whether there's a forest nearby, local air quality, and so on and so forth. So all these things feature into the valuation of housing. You can imagine that if you have a database with all these characteristics, you could run a regression and sort out what is the value of the attribute that you're interested in, for instance, vicinity to a park or a forest or a beach or what have you. 2 complications there. One is the builders are stupid and they realize that nicer environments attract higher price offers, so they will build the same houses in the same environments. And you need to somehow control for that. And the other reason that's a bit more complicated is that hedonic pricing doesn't just apply to housing, but it also applies to labor markets. Some people find it hard to imagine that you would get a lower wage in a more attractive environment, but just put yourself into hopefully your guys in a not too distant future position where you're called into the office of your boss and he says or she says, I want you to go work in Paris for the next 6 months. And you'll be Paris, right? Now think the boss calls you into the office and says, I want you to go work in Moormans for a year. You're less cheerful then, right? And you think, how do I explain this to the people at home, right? And your immediate response would be, yes, but then I want pay rise. So sending people to harsh environments actually means that they can demand a premium on their wage. So you can also use labor markets to estimate the value of the environment. The complication here is, of course, that in areas where people have higher wages, houses tend to be more expensive. So the housing market reflects the environment, the labor market reflects the environment, and the labor market reflects the housing market, and vice versa. So you have a big problem with homogeneity and simultaneity. But you can imagine that if you have sufficient data and you're a good econometrician, you can sort these things out. These are all the methods, as I said. Travel costs go back to the 1950s, and then the pricing to the 1960s. They are based on associated markets and surrogate markets, related markets, and they look at people's expenditure at patterns. They are their actual expenditure. These are so-called revealed preference markets. Problem with these things is that you can only apply them to consumption values. People go to the beach to enjoy themselves. People buy a house to live there, and they immediately enjoy their environment. But there's other things we care about, and they may be harder to find in people's behavior. I care about whales, the animals, not the country, or the countries mostly. But there's nothing in my behavior that will tell you that I care about that. I don't contribute to Greenpeace because I don't like their energy and climate policy. Greenpeace is the major NGO for the protection of marine wildlife. But I don't like Greenpeace, so I don't contribute to them. So you can inspect all my bank records, but you would not find a donation to Greenpeace. You can follow me around for many years, every day, and you would find that I don't go whale watching. Done it once, the animal didn't show up, I won't do it again. So nothing in my behavior will tell you that I care about whales. Yes, I do. And you just have to take my word for it. For these sort of preferences and these sort of situations, we rely on survey methods. And the oldest one is contingent valuation, where essentially you go and ask people how much would you be willing to contribute to help preserve the blue mink whale. Later on, people realized that these sort of open questions are perhaps not fully informative, and nowadays most people use contingent choice methods, where essentially you ask people to choose between two hypothetical situations that differ in the number of whales that are around and differ in the amount of money that is around, and you ask them to make a choice. And sometimes you have to figure out what is there implied. The good thing about these stated preference methods, these valuation, contingent choice, is that you can apply them to basically everything. Anything that people may care about, you can interview them, how much do you care? So that is their main strength. That's also the main drawback of revealed preference methods. You can only use them for a limited range of things that people care about. The main disadvantage, or the main advantage of revealed preferences is that these are the actual choices of people, whereas stated preferences, they are what people say their preferences are, what people say their choices are. And that can lead to a range of problems. Some of them are due to anchoring and familiarity. If I send you guys to the supermarket to get some bread and some milk, or you go to the supermarket to get some bread and some milk, chances are you come back with the bread that you were looking for and the quality of milk that you were looking for, and you pay the price you think is a reasonable price. Why? Because you do this presumably once a week or so, maybe a bit more often. So you have a lot of experience in going to the supermarket, and then there's 17 types of milk and there's 30 types of bread, and you know which one to go for, right? If I put you in the supermarket in a strange country, where people write in a strange way, say Japan, and use a currency that you're completely unfamiliar with, what do? You're confronted with lots of choice. You're confronted with different prices that you can't really understand because you don't really know how much 10 yen is worth. So at a certain point you get annoyed and you just grab the first thing you get, you can find and walk out of the supermarket. You discover at home that you really did not get the quality that you wanted, or you could really pay way too much. So unfamiliarity is just a topic. You're simply not prepared to spend a lot of time on choices like this, and therefore we make relatively random choices. Now we actually make unfamiliar decisions all the time. If you're buying insurance or you're buying a second-hand car, that's not a decision you make every day. But what do you do before you buy a second-hand car? You go talk to your dad, you go look on the internet, you go talk to your friends, how much should I be paying for a 10-year-old car, right? Before you make the choice to buy it. Now, if somebody walks up to you on the streets and says, how much are you prepared to pay for a whale? You don't have the time to go ask your dad. You probably not know the answer. You can't look it up on the internet. What is the fair price for these animals nowadays? It's a completely unfamiliar thing for you to do. So a lot of people would not know the answer. They feel under time pressure to answer, and they come up with a random number, right? And there's all sorts of things that can go wrong in these experiments. Somebody walks up to you on the street and asks you this question and has a bad breath. You give a different answer, right? If it's a pretty girl who walks up to you, you think, ooh, she's interested in nature protection. I'd better exaggerate. She's just doing this for money, right? She's not doing this for helping the whales, right? She's just making a quick buck. You giving a higher number does not get you into her panties, but not that males think that way, right? Instinctively. So there's all sorts of things that can go wrong. And there's also outright manipulation that can go on. People realize I'm being asked a hypothetical question. They're not going to ask for my money, so I can give whatever answer I want. People realize that I'm probably going to ask this question from 1,000 people, and what matters in the end is the average. So if I care about this, I should give a high number. That's the way I raise the average closer to what I think the number should be. People go in and actively manipulate it. And just the way these questions are phrased may change the result. If you ask a question, we're going to construct this nature reserve and we're going to build a fence around it and then charge entrance fees. You ask a question like that in Europe, people would say, I don't really like that, I prefer free access, right? If you ask the question, you're going to create a nature reserve, everybody's going to have free access, but you're going to pay for this through increased taxes, then people in America would say taxes, no, right? As Europeans think it's normal to contribute to these things through the system of general taxation that require taxes is own side. But for paying at the entrance, in the United States it's the exact opposite. So the same question would elicit a different response from Europeans and Americans that does not reflect how much they care about nature, but reflect how they look at how these things should be governed. Right? So you should be very careful in how you do this. And all sorts of things can go wrong. There's two things I want to highlight that are particularly important to climate change. So far, I've phrased everything in terms of welfare gains, and you giving up some part of your money to acquire this welfare gain, and that is so-called willingness to pay, or equivalent variation if you want to be pedantic about it. You can of course also imagine a situation where we're actually talking about a welfare loss and people offering you money to compensate you for that welfare loss. And that is a so-called willingness to accept compensation or the compensating variation. Now, there is a famous paper by Wheeler from 1976 who shows that A, that the consumer surplus lies somewhere in between, and B, that the compensating variation to accept compensation is greater than the willingness to pay for the same goods. And the immediate reason for this, the immediately obvious reason for this, is the income effect. Willingness to pay, you're giving up some of your income to get something that you want. So you're constrained by how much money you have. Whereas willingness to accept compensation, you're getting money. So you're not constrained by your income. You're constrained by the income of the rest of the world. Now, if you're buying trivial things, then that should not really affect our income. And therefore, we have also shown that to a very close approximation, willingness to pay should be almost similar, should be almost identical, to willingness to accept compensation. This is not supported by the data at all. What you're looking at here is the results of a number of studies that estimated willingness to pay, then the willingness to accept compensation of the same goods, and then calculated the ratio of the two. Helix said that should be almost 1. What we see here is that 4% of the studies it's somewhere between 1 and 2, with actually you have also said it should be close to 1 but greater than 1, so it should definitely not be smaller than 1. But also a large number of studies find that this ratio is more like 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 or 20. How can that be? One of the first studies that showed this did it with Mars bars and coffee mugs. And in one scenario, class of students and the professor went around and showed them this beautiful university mug and said, how much are you going to pay for this? The students were not dumb. They know that these things cost $5 in the shop downstairs. And they answered roughly $5. That was one scenario. And the other scenario, the professor gave the students a mug and then 5 minutes later said, now I'm going to take it away and give you money in return. How much money should I give you? And the students answered $10, $15, $20. Bizarre, right? The first instance is bizarre. Because they knew that if they would get $10 from the professor, right, they could go down to the shop and buy 2 mugs. So this may just be resentment, right? He's giving it to me, now it's mine. And the professor is not allowed to take away my stuff, right? He's not going to deny him anyway. Maybe something like that. There's definitely an element of loss aversion and adherence to the status quo there. There's also issues with voluntary and involuntary risks. If you get drunk, you get into a car, get yourself into an accident, lose a leg, that's bad, right? That's a severe welfare loss. If somebody else gets drunk, gets into a car, gets you into an accident and you lose a leg, it's worse, right? It's even worse when it's a rich bastard in a big Mercedes. The little old lady in a small Fiat who actually wasn't drunk gets you into an accident, you lose your leg. Bad too, but not as bad as the drunk bastard in the big Mercedes. Right? Objectively, the three scenarios are the same, right? You lost your leg. So why is one situation worse than the other? And the context in which these welfare losses happen apparently are relevant to us. Because apparently we're not called rational people. Right? We're not a caricature model of microeconomics. Why does this matter for climate change? Most emissions come from rich countries, most greenhouse gas emissions. The problem of climate change is mostly driven by what rich people are doing. The impacts of climate change are mostly suffered by poor people. Climate change is not something that we do to ourselves, but because of the delays in the climate system, climate change is something that is imposed on us by whatever the previous generation. So it is an imposed risk. And if you're living in Bangladesh, it isn't something other people do to you, not something that you did to yourself. Right? So the sentiment actually matter, right? And therefore, it matters whether we formulate climate policy as a way of buying a better climate for our children, or whether we conceptualize climate policy as a way of getting compensation for past wrong. And the results will be completely different in terms of numbers. Now, final point. I talked about valuation. I talked about a number of things that can go wrong. As a result, state of the art is now that if you want to do a valuation study and you want to get it accepted into a journal or accepted by a court in evidence or something, you need to spend a good bit of time and money. And typically a primary valuation study can take a PhD student 2 years, it costs about a year, right? Full-time work. That's sort of where we are. So these are expensive things. As a result, there aren't too many primary valuations. If you want to sort of assess the implications of a widespread effect, you need lots of these values. You know what is the value of this thing being damaged and that thing getting better and so on and so forth. You want a comprehensive assessment of all the things that are changing. So what people do necessarily is they extrapolate along. So they take a value that is estimated in one context for one environmental problem, for one type of ecosystem, and they apply it to another ecosystem for another issue in another place or in another time. This is called benefit transfer in the jargon, and it's necessary because we don't have primary valuation studies. For a situation like climate change, it is even more obvious that we need this. The impacts of climate change fall mostly in the future. We can't travel to the year 2080 to do a primary valuation study, travel back to 2015, right? So we need to take the information of 2015 and extrapolate what would be the valuation in 2080. There's no choice, right? And because climate change in the past has been relatively mild to what we expect in the future, we also have to take values from acidification or eutrophication studies and apply them to climate change, assuming that the two are similar. Now, as my discussion about willingness to pay versus willingness to accept suggests that this is hard, right? Because a lot of these things are context specific. And this extrapolation is actually difficult. And I'm going to just underline how difficult it is with this particular study. This is from the work of Marianne Sanderson, who once upon a time wrote a PhD with me in Hamburg. The context here is travel cost, a travel cost study of the recreation value of forests in Denmark. And there's 52 forests in Denmark. And she had data for visitor numbers to all of these forests for the years 1977 and 1990. And she estimated a travel cost model, and derived the value per square meter of these forests. She did that in 1977, predicted what the values would be in 1997, and then she estimated in 1997 and looked at what is my forecast error. That is what you see here on the horizontal axis. You're looking at the 52 forests, and at the vertical axis, you're looking at the prediction error. And then the darker diamonds are when she just assumed that the value would stay the same. Inflation is the only thing that affects valuation. And then she gets to horrendous forecast errors. And then with the other methods, she applied a lot of the data from 1997 to her 1977 model. So for instance, the model had how people got to the forest. Did they take the train? Did they cycle? Did they take the car? And she applied the changed share of travel modes over the 20-year period, family composition, and all those sort of things. also were updated from the 77 to the 97 values. That's a luxury we don't have with climate change, right? But that's a luxury you can do in a validation study. But then still, for some forests, you got it almost right. Forecast error of 20% or less. The other forests, the forecast errors go up to 400%. It was a factor of 5 up. And we're talking here about a simple study, travel cost. We're talking about a simple product, a few hours walking in the forest. We're talking about a country that is homogeneous and stable. There aren't many countries that are poor in Denmark. Right? Nothing ever happens there. And yet she cannot get it right over a 20-year period. And for climate change, we need to do this sort of exercise for countries that are a lot more dynamic than Denmark is over a much longer period. And just to drive home the point, similar sort of exercises. Top is simple explanation, bottom is more complicated explanation for a range of issues, not over time but over space, all in the United States. In one country, right? Prediction errors of 5%, no, with 1% and 1%, right? And the prediction errors range somewhere between 1% and 500%. Right? We simply do not understand monetary valuation well enough to accurately predict people's values. And unfortunately, that is what we need to do if we want to study the implications of climate change.